The famous Pentagon, the headquarters of the United States Department of Defense, located next to Washington, D.C. Approximately 26,000 people work in this iconic building, which features 5 sides, 5 concentric rings of offices, 5 above-ground floors, and 2 underground levels. It is the second largest office building in the world by floor area. Each side measures 921 feet, 281 meters. The building is so big that even General Eisenhower once got lost trying to find his office. Despite its size, it was completed in just 1 year and 4 months, a project that would normally take 4 years. It is an incredibly iconic building, known for its massive size, importance, and especially its unique shape, which has become the official logo of the Department of Defense. But have you ever wondered why it was built with 5 sides? There's a reason for it, and it's quite a fascinating story. Oh, and it has 284 restrooms, twice as many as a building of its size would typically need. And until 2011, it had only 1 elevator for its 26,000 employees. Let's explore the history of its construction and the curiosity surrounding this powerful and mysterious building. It's mid-1941, World War II is underway, and there's a growing sense that the United States will soon have to join the conflict. The team at what was then the War Department, later to become the Department of Defense, had been expanding rapidly since World War I and was scattered across 17 temporary buildings in Washington, as well as in hotels and apartments. This made communication and transportation challenging and reduced operational efficiency. General Somervell was then tasked with building a new headquarters in preparation for the war. Instead of constructing a headquarters solely for the top commanders, he decided that the best solution would be a single building to house the entire department. On a Thursday, July 17, 1941, Somervell tasked architect George Bergstrom with designing a building that could accommodate 40,000 people and 10,000 cars. The building was to have only 3 or 4 floors to save steel, cut costs, speed up construction, and avoid obstructing the view. Oh, and he wanted the initial draft of the plan on his desk by 9 o'clock Monday morning. No pressure. Since the building couldn't have many floors, it would need to cover a massive area, meaning it couldn't be located in Washington, D.C. It was then decided that it would be built across the Potomac River, right here, east of Arlington National Cemetery. At the time, the land already had existing roads and others that were planned, surrounding the area on 5 sides, so the massive building had to fit into that space. They tested several ideas until they decided on a 5-sided design to maximize the utilized area, as the building couldn't have many floors. Is it starting to look familiar? But this building still isn't quite in the shape we know today, nor in the right location. The thing is, nobody wanted this massive building in that area, no matter what shape it had. Gilmore Clark, who was then the chairman of the Commission of Fine Arts, the agency that guides the architectural style of Washington, D.C., opposed the proposal. He argued that the Pentagon would block the view of Washington, D.C. from Arlington National Cemetery, the most traditional and famous military cemetery in the United States. Additionally, Frederick Delano, who was then the head of the agency responsible for providing planning guidance for federal land and buildings in the region, and most notably, the uncle of then-President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, also opposed the plan, primarily due to concerns about the traffic it would create over the Potomac River. Several members of Congress were also against it. President Roosevelt then wrote a letter to a Senate subcommittee, expressing his concerns and requesting that the building be smaller. But the letter was simply ignored, and Congress approved the original design. Disappointed with Congress, Roosevelt ordered the building to be constructed slightly farther south. To comply with the legislation approved by Congress, part of the Pentagon's parking lot was designed to occupy a portion of the land from the original site. This way, there would be no legal issues. And look at how massive the parking lot is. It's even bigger than the building. At the new location, the design was expanded to include 5 above-ground floors. Since there was plenty of space at the new site, the building no longer had to be restricted to having 5 sides. But the architects decided to keep the 5-sided shape to save time. Remember, they were about to enter World War II. What they did was refine the design to make it more symmetrical, resembling old forts, which were one of their inspirations. This shape also offered significant benefits, which had already been considered early on by the architects. Since it has more sides than conventional rectangular buildings, its shape is closer to a circle. This means the farthest points are closer together compared to a rectangle of the same area. As a result, it takes only 7 to 10 minutes for someone to walk across the building. The architects calculated that distances traveled within the Pentagon are 30 to 50% shorter compared to a rectangular building. In other words, it combines the benefits of a circular building with the ease of construction provided by its straight sides, which was good because they were in a hurry. Construction began in September 1941 and was completed in January 1943, just 1 year and 4 months later. Normally, it would have taken 4 years to build a structure of this size. Imagine the pressure the workers went through to finish this project so quickly.
A state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
After the attack on Pearl Harbor and the United States' entry into the war, funding poured in and construction sped up significantly. At its peak, the project employed as many as 15,000 workers, including 110 architects and 97 engineers.
Pearl Harbor changed everything. All restrictions were off, the money rolled, and the construction effort speeded up tremendously.
This speed came at a cost. The initial budget was $35 million, but the final cost, including roads, reached $85 million, equivalent to $1.5 billion today. Even so, it was considered a low cost given the scale of the project. In fact, the savings from no longer paying rent for the old buildings meant the Pentagon paid for itself within 8 years. The 5 sections were built clockwise. Just 7 months after construction began, some offices were already operational, even while the work was still ongoing. To save steel for the war effort, primarily for shipbuilding and ammunition production, as well as to cut costs and speed up construction, only 13 elevators were installed. Of these, 12 were designated for freight, and just 1 was for staff, reserved exclusively for the Secretary of War and his team. Instead, many staircases and long ramps were built. Later, during a renovation that began in 1994 and concluded in 2011, an additional 70 elevators were installed. And instead of using those massive steel columns and beams fastened with rivets for the main structure, commonly used at the time for building construction, they chose to use reinforced concrete, which saved a significant amount of steel. In total, around 38,000 tons of steel were saved, enough to build a massive battleship. The primary material, 680,000 tons of sand and gravel used for the building's reinforced concrete, including 41,500 pilings, was sourced directly from the nearby Potomac River. Unfortunately, the use of asbestos, a carcinogenic material, instead of steel for 17.5 miles of ductwork, created a problem that had to be addressed many years later. But if there's one thing they didn't skimp on, it was the restrooms. The building could have had 140, but instead, it has 284, twice as many as needed for a structure of that size. That's because Virginia still had segregation laws back then. The president had signed a law in June 1941 prohibiting segregation among federal employees. However, Virginia state authorities insisted that the facility remain segregated, leading to the construction of additional restrooms. But before the Pentagon was officially opened, Virginia gave in, and federal law was enforced within the building. For a considerable time, it was the only building in the state without racial segregation. Back during the Cold War, there's a story that the Soviets always had at least 2 nuclear missiles aimed at the Pentagon's hot dog stand, located right in the center of the building. The story goes that they noticed a lot of people frequently heading to the center and assumed it might be an underground entrance to a command center. However, no one in Russia has ever confirmed this story. It was likely just an internal joke at the Pentagon. After all, a single Soviet nuclear missile would have been enough to destroy the entire city and much of the surrounding area. There'd be no need to specifically target the central hot dog stand. And that's the story behind the construction of the famous Pentagon. Thank you for your company, and until next time.